Welcome to a Practice Pro CPD, brought to you by LAWPRO.
Well, good morning and welcome everyone. I'm going to invite my colleague Mawash Khan to start our event.
Thank you, Judah. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Mawash, and I go by the pronouns she, her. I'm the Communication Council and chair of our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Group at LAWPRO. So I really want to start by taking a moment to honor the lives of the 215 children found buried in Kamloops and acknowledge the impact of this discovery on all Indigenous peoples, especially the families from whom these children were taken. We also want to acknowledge the tragic event in London, Ontario, leaving a child to navigate this world without his family. People from all walks of life are struggling right now. As we continue to live through a global pandemic and grapple with distressing news, the need for continued conversations and mental health supports is amplified. We need to be empathetic and we need to be here for each other. We also have a responsibility to our relationships and the ancestral lands on which we live and the obligations to those treaties and Indigenous peoples in Canada. I'm in Vaughan today, which I respectfully acknowledge is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaty First Nation, the Huron-Wendat and the Métis Nation, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples. The offices of LAWPRO and the Toronto Lawyers Association are located in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Toronto was covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. As this meeting is virtual and we are not all gathered in the same space, so for many of you, this land acknowledgement is not for the traditional territory that you are on. If so, we invite you to take some time to learn about and acknowledge the traditional territory and treaty lands that you are on. As a resource, you can visit the website native-lands.ca and search a location under the Resources tab, or reach out to a Friendship Center for guidance. I would like to recognize the long history of all First Nations in Ontario and the Métis and Inuit peoples. We thank First Nations people who lived and live in these lands, excuse me, for sharing them with us in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mawash. And I'm Judah Stravchinsky. I'm the director of Practice Pro, LAWPRO's Claims Prevention and Risk Management program. Thank you for joining us for today's event, brought to you by LAWPRO in proud partnership with Toronto Lawyers Association. Today's event, Continuing to Manage Mental Health Resilience and Resources, is a continuation of an event we started in February. To those of you who attended or watched that program, welcome back. And to those who are newly joining us, welcome. Thank you for taking your time with us today. Pandemics have, a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's what a colleague of mine in public health tells us all the time. And, since February, since our last mental health check-in, many of us have received vaccines. We hope that we're closer to the end of this, but we're not through yet. And as we start, as we said at the start of our last event, whatever you're feeling at this moment, you're not alone. And so today, we have about an hour and a half together, and we're going to use that time to explore three main themes. First, we'll have a continued mental health check-in. We're going to talk about what people are experiencing through the pandemic. We'll have some lived experiences shared. We'll talk about what we are all hearing on the front lines and in our personal lives. Second, we're going to discuss mentoring. And that's because we heard from many of you at the end of the first discussion in February that given our current states of isolation, it's been really hard for people to maintain their professional relationships, be they formal or informal. So we'll spend some time today talking about how we maintain our communities through mentoring relationships and generally stay connected despite our physical separation. And finally, we're going to spend a bit more time today looking at boundary setting. That was something that we started a conversation on in February, and it was clear not just at that event, but even as early as from my law Twitter feeds this morning, that people are still trying to figure out how to set boundaries and are asking for the law Twitter hive mind or wherever they can for tips. And so we're going to continue that conversation as well. We've put together program resources that you can access to help further the discussions and further the learning. They're available for download, and you can see them in the chat function. They're also available by link from today's program page at practicepro.ca/CPD. I'm joined today by an incredible all-star lineup of speakers. And so rather than introduce you to each and every one of them, you can see their bios and the resources, but I'm also going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves when they first speak. So let's get started with our first topic, and Mawash, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Judah. So like Judah mentioned, we want to build on the conversations we started in February, and I'm going to start with Erin. Your initial tweet on Bell Let's Talk Day, and then the articles you wrote, which are in the program materials, got thousands of reactions, hundreds of comments, and I'm sure that's not even counting all the private messages that you received. But I really found a similar theme in some of the comments. You are not alone. Thank you for paving the way for more honesty, and you have redefined leadership. Please share your story with us, Erin.
Thank you, Mawash. And for those of you who don't live your life on social media like I do, you may not know what Mawash was referring to. And essentially what happened was early this year, on January the 11th, I went off work because I was not well. I refer to it as a burnout. My doctor would refer to it as depression and anxiety. But I basically ran into a brick wall going 100 miles per hour and was not able to work in my practice. And I didn't plan to share my story. I think like most people who go through a hard time, my inclination was to hide in my room under the blankets and spend a lot of time with my two dogs and my family and to kind of suffer through it alone. And the reason I decided to speak was as I was off, I was observing on social media a lot of people posting similar things that I had been feeling at that time. People were exhausted, people were frustrated, people seemed unhappy in their work, and it seemed to be being shared far more frequently than I had ever seen in the past. And it also just happened to correspond around the same time as Bell Let's Talk Day. So without telling anyone, including my husband or my parents or my firm, that I was about to do this, I wrote a fairly lengthy article on LinkedIn, which was a bit therapeutic for me to do, which shared my experience, and you can still find it there if you search for me. And I basically chronicled my experience with burnout, what I had been going through, and I kind of left some tips there for how we can do better to support a high performance workforce, both yourself when you're dealing with those symptoms and also how employers can better support their people. So certainly I didn't expect when I did that I would end up being featured in the Globe and Mail. Maybe if I knew that, I wouldn't have done it. But the response was unbelievable on a few different levels. One is, as Mawash said, I received so many personal messages from people, some of whom are on this meeting today, and people who had gone through similar experiences in their life and had gotten through it. People who were earlier in their journey with burnout who had not yet taken steps, that decided to take steps after reading about what I had said. and others who just wanted to say that they had my back and were thinking of me. So ultimately, I was very happy that I posted it and that I was putting myself out there in that manner. It's been a long journey since then. And, it really was a long journey before then. Looking back, I saw on Facebook the other day a post that I had done more than a year ago, which, was pretty, looking back on it, I was obviously going through a hard time then and not noticing it. I had indicated it has been a really tough week and, really tough month. And I think I was struggling for a while. The signs of burnout are, cynicism with your job, exhaustion, and lack of efficiency in your work. And for me, I think the symptoms came in that order. I first developed a high level of cynicism at my firm regarding decisions that were made, regarding my work, regarding the amount of my work. And I think it developed from there into exhaustion, and then finally not being nearly as effective for my clients as I wish I would have been. So my journey back has been interesting. I think sharing my story was useful because, again, I developed a network of informal supporters that helped me through the hard times, and other people who I discussed things with in terms of returning to work after a burnout. And the returning to work part was far more challenging than I expected. And certainly in hindsight, I may have managed some of that differently. And ultimately, the whole experience gave me a lot of time to think about what I wanted to do with my career and what was important to me, and led to my decision to just recently, in the past month or so, start my own legal practice. And I think one thing that people are worried about when sharing their own experiences is whether their colleagues in the bar or whether their clients will look at them differently. And for me, I've actually developed a closer relationship with my colleagues at the bar and my clients as a result of this. And I've had many clients feel open enough to share with me their similar experiences. And I haven't lost one client because of my mental health challenges or my speaking. And I haven't lost one friend at the bar because of it either. So, it was a very hard time, and it's something I wish on no one. But ultimately, currently, I'm feeling quite good. And I think what I'm seeing with others in the profession as well is a lot more optimism as we're coming out the other side of the pandemic.
Erin, thank you so much for sharing your story. And, I want to quote Kara Hardin from the Law Society's Mental Health Summit when she said, "Radical hope requires radical honesty." And I think that the profession will benefit from your honesty and leadership, for years to come. So, Orlando, you said that success is a false friend of mental health. We'd love to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Maywash. I just want to say first, acknowledge the bravery of what Erin just did, and what she's been doing in writing and on social media since January to acknowledge burnout, depression, and anxiety. Because there's still a great deal of stigma surrounding it, but acts like that really do chip away and demonstrate by force of leadership what others should be doing as well to help themselves. And I say that a bit from personal experience because a lot of what you said resonated with me. Since 9 years old, I've suffered from major depression, and it oscillates between major depression and dysthymia. every few years quite regularly. And like Aaron, I hid it from everybody until about 2014. And that even was a secret after a suicide attempt in 2008, which saw me in the hospital for 6 months recovering. I still didn't tell anybody what was wrong. And I didn't because I was so afraid of the stigma. I think people are talking about it a lot more. For me, I decided to make it public when I became president of the Ontario Bar Association. And that was picked up by Law Times and then by the Toronto Star on the front page under the fold article, which is how my family found out about it. And at first they were quite upset with me, and you know, I had to deal with that. My one of my daughters in particularly was upset that I disclosed this. But in disclosing it, I also found that a lot of people in my family had suffered from depression and anxiety, and there were, in fact, suicides and suicide attempts that they had all kept secret for generations. And also, it opened up the door in the legal profession to people willing to talk to me about their own experiences. And I was overwhelmed by the number who suffer either episodically or periodically, and how much need there was just to air this out, you know, just to talk about it. Because in talking about it, you do, as Aaron said, find almost by accident this network of people who are willing to help you and want your help. And I found that making myself available to talk about it has always been difficult, even today, and always takes a piece of me. But it's always a bit cathartic as well, and helps me feel worthwhile insofar as I can help somebody else. And that improves my chronically low sense of self-worth to do things like this. One of the things I've noticed, getting back, Maywash, to your quote, you know, success is a false friend. One of the ways that I hid my what would be high functioning depression, in the sense that I could be depressed and no one would know it. I've done 36 trials while in a major depressive episode. And the way that I try to deal with it before opening up is by being successful, you know, as if that pat on the back for the extra long hours would displace the feeling of worthlessness. You know, the badge of honor that you would get for pulling an all-nighter, you know, the win in court, the unreasonably large number of billable hours at the end of the month, whatever it was, I thought was the answer. And for me, it wasn't ultimately. And it took me maybe 25 years to realize this, but it was the cure for depression for me wasn't success as such, as traditionally defined, or as you might be convinced it is through law school and otherwise. The cure for depression for me was hope always. And that was knowing that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Because if I could see that light, I always felt that I could endure almost anything to get there. But if there was no light there and I felt hopeless, that was the time when I was in my worst period. And I always try to find hope. And if I can't find hope, I try to find meaning. And meaning in the sense of, you know, giving back, helping others, and using that to help improve my sense of self-worth. So I want to congratulate Aaron and everyone else who speaks up about this issue, because it makes it so much easier for others to talk. And after things like this, I get so many messages and comments and questions. There's an almost insatiable appetite for this kind of discussion, precisely because it helps others. And we've seen it as many of us participated in the Mental Health Summit with the Law Society, where there are over 4,000 registrants. We need to keep talking, and I like to tip my hat to those who've taken that leadership role. So
Thank
back
you,
to you,
Aaron.
Maywash. Yeah.
Thank you. It's always such an honor listening to you and hearing your story. I honestly never get tired of it at all. Underlying tones of empathy and kindness, which always makes me think of Doran. And so here I'm going to ask you, what are you hearing from sole practitioners in particular, and what are some of your perspectives, Doran?
Thank you so much, Mawash. And so I'm going to start by following Orlando, thanking Aaron by thanking Orlando for doing precisely the same thing, and for the power that both of them and Michelle Hollins and Justice Moldaver of the Supreme Court of Canada and Justice Gascon. I mean, if you notice, one of the difficulties with stigma in the legal profession is if you got a profession full of geniuses, and everyone seems so pulled together and brilliant and completely unfazed, well, then if I'm not well, there must be something wrong with me, juxtaposed against all those superhumans. And what has been so powerful about the people like this speaking out has been, we are blowing open the myth of the superhuman lawyer, and we're moving to perhaps the era of the human lawyer, who happens to be excellent, outstanding, but human. And I recall, and you can even look it up, Judah, because I wrote it for LAWPRO magazine in 2008. I wrote an article called "Debunking the Lone Sufferer Myth Once and for All," and it was all about the fact that I was working at a lawyer assistance program and receiving phone call after phone call from people who were dealing with various issues, and lawyers specifically at the time. And eventually, one after another, they would ask, anyone else in the profession dealing with this? And it would have been ridiculous had it not been so sad that each of them thought they were the only one, because they weren't talking to each other and they weren't hearing people like Aaron and Orlando speak out. So what we're trying to do is bust this myth of imperviousness to human challenge in a profession that is particularly challenging, more than the average person. Lawyers, as all the statistics show, struggle with depression, anxiety, substance use, etc. There was a question that came in on the chat, and I wanted to address it because it goes to some of what Aaron was talking about. It was, is the cynicism and burnout an indication that the role or job is not right for you, or if burnout or possibly related mental health conditions like depression or anxiety are treated, do many return, quote unquote, happily to the same environment? And what I'll say is, it's usually that the environment, much as the way Aaron described it, the environment is an unhealthy environment. Sometimes the environment is an environment that you don't fit into. So maybe it's an environment where there is not a lot of feedback, where there's the workload is beyond anything that a normal person can handle, where people aren't kind to each other. In fact, they may be worse than just not kind. It may be an environment where you don't fit in terms of you're working in the area of law that you don't feel comfortable in, or maybe you don't fit in law at all. Goodness knows, I was a practicing lawyer and I left 15 years ago now. And there's all kinds of reasons why a person will feel misaligned, and burnout can ensue because the person feels that they don't have agency, that they can't have a positive impact on their functioning, on how their life is going to be and how their practice is going to be. And what happens is, when we work with them in counseling, we work with them on aligning themselves back with who they are, whether it's aligning themselves with the kind of work that they want to be doing, with the kind of people they want to be working with, the kind of organizations they want to work in, or if they want to work on their own in private practice and small practice, etc., or if they want to do something else altogether. The more aligned the person is with themselves, with their own values and their own passions, the more likely they are to be quote unquote happy, or at least fulfilled. And people who find that absolutely do either reintegrate into a workplace, uh, making it healthier. If you can reintegrate it to a workplace because you've told them what the challenges are and they've adapted, then great. Some workplaces won't adapt and one may have to make some changes. Point is, what you're looking for is being aligned with who you are and what your values and goals are, and feeling like your life is moving in that direction, that you have the power to make your life go in the direction you want to. And goodness knows, at different stages of a career, for a paralegal or a lawyer, you have more or less ability to do that. Sometimes you just have to take the job you get straight out of your call because you have to pay back your bills and your loans, and you have to get your career started. But you gather agency, you gather the strength and the ability to steer your career in a direction. And that includes people to address what Mawash was talking about, people in private practice, dealing with very specific challenges, especially in smaller firms, dealing with the isolation that was already hard during a pandemic. But if you're isolated or you're working from home and you're at a Bay Street firm, you may still have a team that you can commiserate with. If you're a sole practitioner, what is your team? Who are you collected with? Who are you comparing notes with? Who are you debriefing with after a difficult matter? The fact is that the pandemic has taken a toll on all of us, every last one of us, every 8 billion or so of us in the world, frankly, in different ways. And there has been a relentlessness to it. And this is true for all of us, but particularly for those who have been on their own trying to maintain a practice. I've been noting that we were looking for hope, to go to what Orlando was talking about, that the hope is what you need. The light at the end of the tunnel is what you need. And the pandemic has been so not a light at the end of the tunnel experience. It's been this uncertain, relentless, oppressive experience for many people. We thought 2020 was difficult. We short ourselves up. We got through the beginning of the pandemic. 2021 will be better. And then 2021 came and it was pretty much just the same as 2020 was. But then we heard about vaccines and we thought, all right, there's hope. But then we found out that the vaccine production is a little bit stunted. But then we found out that we're going to get our vaccines. Oh no, variants. I mean, one thing after another has kicked us around, dragged us around, and we're waiting for this opportunity to just exhale. You notice how people are reacting to the idea that places in Ontario are opening up. The exhale that comes from that, that's the hope we're looking for. I invite everyone to embrace, as much as you feel safe to embrace, the idea that we may actually be getting to a better place now, finally. But it's been really hard on all of us. It's made it very hard to be productive every single day. And a lot of us aren't really kind to ourselves in those situations. We think we should be able to be productive, even though this pandemic and everything associated with it has really kicked us around. So back to what Mawash said, the idea of being kind to yourself through all of it, through the unproductive days, having the difficulty of working from home and having all the boundary issues around that. What is home and what is work? And we'll talk more about boundaries later, so I won't talk about it too much right now, but that's taking a toll on people too, because there are no delineated lines between what is home and what is work. Some people are working at a kitchen table, preparing for trial on this chair and then having breakfast on the other chair at the same kitchen table. So what's home and what's work? And all the other things like kids doing homeschooling from home and the liquor cabinet being a few steps away, and the confluence of the increased anxiety of a pandemic and the increased availability of substances that seem to take some of the edge off of that anxiety, but in the end cause us greater distress. Those things are all coming together for us if we're at home, if we don't have a team to debrief with. So I absolutely recommend to people that they keep an eye on their substance use, get out of the house, get moving, even if it's just to break out of Zoom fatigue. Zoom fatigue is real. Sorry, Zoom. Stanford just studied it, and they pointed out a few very specific things, like excessive amounts of close-up eye contact is highly intense. It's both the amount of eye contact we engage in on video chats as well as the size of faces on the screen. It's unnatural. We're right here with people, talking to them for extended periods of time. We don't do that in real life. We're doing that for hours a day. Also, by the way, I'm not looking at myself right now. I covered up my face because seeing yourself talking while you're talking is unnatural. We become very self-critical. We notice how we look while we're talking. It's distracting, but it's also not even good for our self-esteem, quite frankly. So I often recommend either covering it up or finding a way in the program to turn off the view of yourself. And also, we're not moving much. So back to my point about getting out, sitting in a chair all day, staring at a screen, is creating a kind of physical atrophy, even just in terms of the physical health of having your hand on a keyboard the whole day. We actually, now that the weather is better, speaking of hope, should deliberately be getting outside, even if it's just to be outside and do nothing. Just stand and collect some vitamin D from the sun. All of that stuff requires a deliberate awareness of one's mental health, physical health, that one deserves to be well. And frankly, it's enlightened self-interest, because to feel well is, or to do things that take care of us, even if we're not feeling great about ourselves, helps us feel better about ourselves. So one of the things, you do nice things for yourself, you start doing yoga, you start taking a walk every day, you start watching what you eat and being more careful about what you eat or how many substances you take in. It's going to have a positive impact on how you feel about yourself, because you're now being nice to yourself. And that feels nice. So maybe you do more of it because you feel the payoff of it. All of it. Notice how you're hearing it from speaker after speaker. Kindness at the core. Kindness to others who are a little short-tempered, a little at the end of their rope, which is pretty much all of us. And kindness to yourself. Letting yourself be imperfect during this time, because there is nobody who's, being great during the pandemic. This is hard.
Thank you, Doran. I'm going to quote you again, where you've said, be present and be kind to others and to yourself. And I want to now come to the treasurer. You've very recently written about how important this work is for you in your recent blog post. So can you tell us what you're seeing and about the current work around mental health as well?
Thanks so much. So, we've seen what Erin has shared with us, what Orlando has shared, and Doran. But I want to look at it from a little bit of a different lens, and I want to talk about numbers, and I want to talk about data. So, when we started this conversation back in February, on February the 5th, the Toronto Lawyers Association and LAWPRO recognized that there was a need to hold these really important conversations. And at that event, something really unique and interesting happened. We had 1,600 people who joined. We had a chat function that became its own support group. And we had an amazing panel where the discussions really talked about and took us through what all of us were feeling in different ways. And so we took that, and from there grew the Mental Health Summit, which was offered by the Law Society. We had, on the first day of that summit, 2,500 people. The summit was a 2-day summit. We had a second day the next day, and we had 1,700 people attend. And it was an amazing experience of people sharing their life experience as legal professionals, what they're experiencing. And those conversations, like the one that we're having today, all come together to do what Doran says. And that is debunking the myth of the lone lawyer or the lone paralegal or the lone legal professional, that I'm the only one who's suffering from these issues. And that was really the power of the chat the first time that we had this conversation, because there was an opportunity for people to share what they were feeling and to understand that they're not alone. So, and I will just say for you that the Mental Health Summit, which is 2 days, free, 8 hours of accredited CPD EDI professionalism is available on the Law Society store, the same as this earlier session that we held on February 5th is available on the Practice Pro website. So those things showed us how important it is to have these conversations, especially now, for all the reasons that Doron said. But that takes me to my next topic, and that's about getting better data. So I am so pleased to tell you about the launch of a national well-being study. So what do we know about the well-being of lawyers and paralegals, the mental well-being about them across Canada? Not a lot. So we do have studies, some really good studies done by in 2012 by the Canadian Bar Association. We have American studies and we have other studies. They were not specific to Ontario, not including paralegals. And now we have the Federation of Law Societies of Canada in connection with all the law societies, the Canadian Bar Association and the University of Sherbrooke, getting together to launch a national well-being study. And why? Well, statistics showed us prior to the pandemic that legal professionals study with mental health and substance abuse issues at a higher rate than the general public, including stress, anxiety, and depression. And we know that there have been COVID impacts, pandemic impacts, as Doron has said. But what are the measurables? What's the extent of the issues that we're facing? We know that the pandemic has left many of us feeling overwhelmed, isolated, and alone. There's just constant demands on us, and we're grappling with them. And we're especially vulnerable right now. And that's why I think this national well-being study is of added importance to help us understanding what exactly are we facing? What are our risks in the legal profession? So there's this gap that's unaddressed and that we're seeking to address through the national well-being study. And its purpose is to provide rich data about the psychological health and well-being of Canadian lawyers and Ontario paralegals at work. So it will identify risk and preventive factors, including it will examine COVID-19. And why is this important? It's important for me as the treasurer or president of the Law Society of Ontario because it allows the legal regulator to have evidence to base decisions on. But it's important for all of us, for the member assistance program, for all of us in our work to understand what exactly are we facing so that we can try to craft answers to best address them. So the questionnaire is open now. It opened on June the 7th. And if you haven't done it, please do it. It's active until January 25th. It's not short. You have to carve out time before you sit down to do it. Although if you can only do it part by part, it will save. But it took me 40 minutes to do. But it said 30 to 45 minutes. It's confidential and the responses are anonymous. So who should be filling this out? Lawyers and paralegals, unemployed, on leave, recently retired, working, articling candidates, experiential candidates who are completing the law practice program at Ryerson or the University of Ottawa, or the integrated practice curriculum at Lakehead University. So it's really important, I believe, for us to have data as we move forward for better understanding what our challenges are and for addressing them. So really, really important that you complete the survey. Please make time. It's an exciting project. So join us in it. If you're wanting to know how to do it, there's a link put in the notes in the chat. In addition, you should have got an email a couple last week. You could check your portal, or you can go to the Law Society website. So lots of ways to access the survey, and we really encourage you to complete it so we can adapt, so we can answer what's being described as a glaring gap in the data with respect to the mental health and well-being of legal professionals across Canada.
And it's interesting, Treasurer, because I completed it yesterday, and so it was great to have this event coming forward. I knew that this was something that was on my to-do list, and so I took the time. And it's a great resource. It allows you to self-reflect as well about how you are doing. It requires you to think through how you're doing, which is a great pulse check. And there are apps for that, which are fantastic, and we can talk about some of those. But just in that professional context, thinking through what's working for you right now and what's not. What's really also fascinating about the study is it's talking about right now. It's a point in time snapshot for the profession. And so it recognizes that we're living through a pandemic. It recognizes that our work has been disrupted. It recognizes that there's anxiety about return to work and what that may look like. And just to thread this through back to one of the things Doron said around agency, is that we all have agency when it comes to making decisions or structuring how our lives are going to be going forward and in the next normal. And so one of the other pieces, I would encourage everyone to do the survey, see how you're feeling right now. But if return to work or making work from our remote workplaces is causing you anxiety, come back next week to our TLA LawPRO continued discussions, because a twin partnered program with this one is one called Working Together Remotely, Managing and Leading Through COVID and Beyond. And the survey is going to ask you about how you're feeling about things like your current work and the prospects of your return to work. So go do that survey right now, and then come back to us next week to learn more about that topic, because we know it's an anxiety point, and we know that people are trying to figure out what is within their power as a manager, as a leader, as staff, as a lawyer, a paralegal, a legal professional. And so I'd encourage you to continue the conversations and to continue to help us better understand the mental health stressors writ large, for better policy through the law societies and elsewhere, but also come to the CPD that's going to help us tackle those together. Thanks.
So Judah, I think the next topic is over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, for all the radical candor around mental health right now. And one of the pieces is around our social isolation and around how we maintain our professional connections. And there's been a lot of articles lately about mentoring and how it's stressed right now, how it's fractured right now, how it's difficult to maintain. I was speaking with a partner at a larger law firm who told me this rather sad story about how his firm has structured mentoring and even has structured mental health check-ins, but because of how busy everyone is, his junior is missing his or her mental health check-in meeting with their mentor, and everyone understands this. And so it's a typical sort of chicken egg issue, or catch-22 issue, I should say, around how do we prioritize time, how do we make things work. But we're trying to crack some of that nut today. And so we've got everyone here on this panel has great experiences with mentors, being mentors, serving as mentors. And so we're going to share some information. And one thing you're going to find in your resource is that LawPRO, we did a bit of an environmental scan, because there are so many amazing general and specific mentoring opportunities available for those in the bar. And so we've put them together into one resource. So whether you're looking for the Law Society's CAN program, or you're looking for the WLAO, or you're looking for a specific area of practice and to gain some mentoring in that area, we have a list of all of the resources we could find from equity seeking groups, from the Advocate Society, from the Ontario Bar Association, from across the province. And we've put them together in a one single document so you can look. And one of the things I'd encourage everyone here today to do would be to look at this guide and think about where you could either gain knowledge and connections through becoming a mentee, or give back, and learn from a mentee by serving as a mentor. And so I'd like to ask Treasurer Donnelly to start to talk a little bit about mentoring, which has helped shape her, and also what the Law Society does in this area. And then right through to Jennifer, who has an incredible career path, and in carving out her path has also done incredible work to develop mentoring that works in a variety of settings. So Treasurer, over to you.
So I'm going to talk about it in a little bit different way. I'm going to talk about it with sort of my two hats. One as a prosecutor, so in my career, and then second of all, from being the treasurer. So before I became the treasurer, I was a prosecutor with the Ministry of the Attorney General for 26 years. And I spent the last 5 years of my time as the West Region Sexual Violence Crown, which meant that I provided assistance and advice and guidance to crowns across the province with respect to sexual violence. And one of the things that I learned when I was doing that, it was essentially a mentoring role. I did my own work, but it was essentially mentoring. And what I learned then is that the people who want help or to be mentored have different wants and needs, and that no one was the same. So for me in my practice, I did whatever they wanted, whether it was a telephone call with advice, I did that. If they had a file and they were, I had calls as my first case, and I'd drive down to wherever they were, because that was when we were meeting in person, and I'd sit in their office and I'd read the file together, and I'd go over the questions, and I'd say, here are things I'd ask, here's what I do for exhibits. Another case I worked on, I sat in court beside the lawyer. I didn't ask any questions, but we'd done our prep work before. I was just there. Another case, I was the lead counsel, and somebody was with me and watching and learning. And as I did my meetings, I shared everything in my trial prep with them. Another one was a jury trial where a crown was doing a jury trial. I wrote the opening, I wrote the closing, I wrote notes for cross-examination. I never went in the courtroom. She didn't want me to go in there. She wanted to deliver it all herself. So it was, for me, it was about crafting my ability as the mentor to craft what the person who sought mentoring wanted, what worked best for them, what was their comfort level, what was their level of need. So that was really important for me to understand that there's no one size fits all, and that there's no magic way of mentoring. And I will also say that I've seen mentoring through all the resources that you have, Judah, but in a much more informal way too. And that is the kind of mentoring that our law libraries offer, in terms of these places for connections, to build relationships, to have these informal chats. So there are so many different ways, whether it's formal mentoring, whether it's the informal chats, whether it's sponsorship. And what I want to turn to, so that's turning away from my prosecutor hat. I want to turn now to the treasurer hat, and that's to the Law Society. So we know that people in small and sole practices have different opportunities, and even in rural areas, different abilities to have the same mentoring or sponsorship opportunities that those in large firms or members of larger or members of associations have. So what do we have to offer for sole and small practitioners? I want to tell you about the Coach and Advisor Network. So when I think about this mentoring topic, for me, it's about building connections, and it's about skills development. It's about how do you get help in your work? Because as Doron said, you be nice to yourself, and that has benefits, and benefits that flow through to your work. So I want to talk to you about two things: coaching and advising. So this is the Coach and Advisor Network. It's free, and it's available to all licensees across the province. So for lawyers and paralegals across the province, please use this resource. There's two different things: coaching and advising. So coaching is about skills development. You will be matched with an experienced peer who will share their experience. It starts with an 1.5-hour session, followed by every other week 30-minute sessions for a 3-month commitment. So I want to talk about it from the you can do skills development, but if you have mental health issues, you will get referred to the member assistance program. But if you have mental health issues, you can still, and dealing with MAP, you can still seek assistance of CAN with things that you might be struggling with: work-life balance strategies, time management, file management, communication skills, people management, relational competence, career development, opening or winding down your practice, transition to practice following a leave of absence. And I reached out to the Coach and Advisor Network and I said, we said, give us specific examples of what we've seen recently. So we've had establishing work-life balance, returning to practice after a maternity leave, feeling overwhelmed by a very busy practice, focusing on having tools to balance work duties and personal obligations, managing the stress of building a practice. So those are the things specifically with respect to mental health and wellness. But I also look at, as I said, in skills development. So for me, I spent my life in court. I always wanted to be the best cross-examiner I could be, because we don't get disclosure as the Crown. So you got to learn the case and be effective in court. So I think of things like examination in chief, cross-examination, opening or closing to a jury, all skills that CAN offers. I look at it from the solicitor's perspective, from real estate, about how to set up practice files, drafting agreements. So solicitors work as well. It's not just for the litigator. So that's the coaching part, which is skills development. And then there's the advising part. And advising gives you an opportunity to call up and connect with someone about a specific issue in your file. So you have a file that you don't know the answer to, that you want to talk to someone who's got more experience. No matter where you are, sole practice, small practice, big practice, anywhere, it's accessible to you to call up, to get help with it. So that may mean you have a real estate file. It may mean you have a estates file where you want to ask specific questions about clauses and drafting. It really can be about anything. So I just really wanted to flag this, the Coach and Advisor Network, as an opportunity, free, available to everybody. Please use it. We saw that during the pandemic, there was an increase in 100 by the number of 100 of the people who used it. And I really want to flag this for you to encourage you to use it. Skills development, file specific questions, coaching and advising.
Thank you, Treasurer. I mean, it's a wonderful program, really. And, from LawPro's perspective, we've talked often, and you've probably, if you've come to a LawPro CPD in the past, heard us say that in terms of managing your practice risks, so much of this comes down to things they didn't teach in law school. And if you're starting out, or even if you're, a veteran, it can be challenging sometimes to manage the skills around communicating with clients, around managing competing deadlines and priorities, around communicating with colleagues, around workload. And so having something like CAN as one more resource, or any of these mentoring programs that assist with skills development, are wonderful programs to help you grow as counsel and grow on the service side piece, as well as the substantive piece. And so, Jennifer, why don't we pass the torch to you, because you've been instrumental in so many different ways in leading mentoring in the profession.
Thank you, Judah. And I want to thank you and Mawash for inviting me to participate in this panel today. I also want to thank Erin and Orlando for sharing your story. I can understand how difficult and challenging and painful that can be, especially when you first do that. But I think it's important for us to hear your stories, and you are truly helping all of us and those of us listening and everyone in the legal profession open up a little bit more about talking about this, because mental health is something that we all need to talk about. We're in a profession that it poses challenges to our mental health. And if we do not take care of our mental health, then we have a rough road ahead, right? I want to situate myself before I talk about mentorship a little. I live with some privilege in the sense that I have pretty decent, good, healthy mental health. But I have from a very young age always been very conscious of the challenges to that. And those challenges come from, having a parent with mental health issues. My father had schizophrenia. I'm also speaking as a racialized woman, and the impact as a racialized person, particularly a South Asian person, of the taboo and cultural intolerance towards these discussions, and how very often there's a lot of shame surrounding these discussions, a lot of not just taboo, but social consequences, being ostracized or diminished, and especially being a racialized lawyer, there's such an expectation of always being strong and with it, and everything that we're hearing through this pandemic, not just the pandemic itself, but as Mawash recognized, the tragedy in London and how that impacts on racialized people in our profession, that we think that could have been me, it's very difficult and traumatizing for many of us. And so this is a time more than ever that we need to take care of ourselves. We need to support each other. And like Doran said, to be kind to ourselves and to others, because there is an incredible weight to that kind of news on us. The Women's Law Association of Ontario has run a mentorship program for a number of years. And I'll just speak briefly about it. I mean, it's a program that connects women with other women, but there are many law associations that have mentorship programs in addition to the coach and advisor program through the Law Society. So connect with the legal association that makes sense to you and aligns with your values, and access their mentorship program. It's very easy for us to say, okay, well, there's these programs, access them, but there's always going to be challenges. And so I have some tips for being a good mentor and a good mentee. So for when you're seeking mentorship and starting that mentorship relationship, seek more than one mentor. And don't necessarily seek mentors who are similar to you. You may need that, so seek people who are different and the same. And it might be by practice area, gender, ethnocultural background, whatever it is. Mix it up a little. And that way you are not only getting supported maybe through some of the commonalities you have with your mentor, but also you're learning from somebody with a different experience and perspective. Be proactive in initiating meetings with your mentors. Assume that your mentor is really busy. Perhaps I would assume they have a very active life and are probably juggling many things. Don't be offended if maybe you don't get a call back or an email right away. Take initiative. And I can, as a mentor myself, I can tell you that I like that. I need that, and it's helpful. And if I don't respond right away, it doesn't reflect on you personally. It's just many of us are juggling many balls. But be proactive, schedule meetings, even if it's a month down the road, schedule a phone call, whatever works for your mentor. And be appreciative of your mentor's time, obviously, but don't be shy to go after that time, because that mentor is signed up for a reason. They have the best of intentions to provide some time to you. Take advantage of that, help them schedule that time. Prepare for the meetings, think about the questions you want to ask, and get to know your mentor. As we're hearing today, these stories are so important. Get to know the story of your mentor and share your own story with your mentor, whatever that might be. You will build a connection just from that. And you do not have to have anything in common. Trust me, there is a shared humanity and commonality to all of us and the diversity of our stories. But in some ways, there's some fundamental sameness. And from the mentor's perspective, Be honest about the time you have, acknowledge it, acknowledge the time that you can carve out for your mentee, talk about how they can communicate with you. You may be comfortable providing your cell phone and say text is better, you know, or I might need a couple texts. Please be tenacious. Discuss the best, you know, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Listen, obviously. I mean, as mentors, I think we all want to talk about ourselves. We assume that's why the mentee is reaching out to us, but take the time to listen to your mentee's story, understand where they're coming from, understand their unique perspective and life experience. And consider sponsorship. There, you know, at the recent summit for women lawyers hosted by the Law Society, there was discussion about mentorship moving into sponsorship. And that is a responsibility or a role that's best suited for the mentor. Consider how you can help your mentee advance his or her career, attain their goals, whatever it is, personal, work-related, whatever. Be a sponsor to them. Introduce them to people. You have a network that they may not have access to. Do what you can to help further that person on their journey. That's all I have to share, really.
These are wonderful tips, Jennifer. I mean, really not just for mentoring, but for managing up, managing down, just communicating and staying connected with people who we'd like to work with, but really lovely tips. And I know when I was a junior lawyer, I was always afraid to ask for the time. But when I did, it was amazing, the responses. And even on cold calls to, you know, people in the profession who I thought had done something cool, and I was curious to learn more. When I finally got the guts to go and reach out to them, everyone is willing to spend some time with others. And so I know that Orlando, you've been doing quite a bit of mentoring lately, and I thought I would ask you for some of your thoughts, because mentoring takes all sorts of shapes and all sorts of forms, and you've also been doing some really interesting work with law students in particular.
It's hard to add anything of value after Jennifer Gold's excellent presentation, but I do have some experience with mentor. I would think now I have around 30 mentees. A large part of it because I've spoken up about my own struggles that people have felt, lawyers and paralegals have felt comfortable reaching out to me. But in connection with law schools in particular, I'm the wellness mentor in residence at the University of Ottawa, UBC, Lincoln Alexander School of Law, and the University of Calgary. And in each one of those cases, I reserve sort of office hours, mostly after 5 o'clock, depending on the time zone. And students can book time with me when they want to talk. And my experience with that is I had first started doing it in person at Ottawa, and the problems were very specific in the sense that someone was worried they got bad marks, and they were worried how that might affect their jobs and job status later. Since the pandemic, it's been much harder to define. There's a malaise, an ambient anxiety, a tedium they find. Imposter syndrome is spiking, it seems. They don't feel they belong, and they're unmotivated more often, and they need help feeling motivated. And there's also some heartbreaking level of loneliness and isolation, I've noticed. More often than I can count, talk to someone who moved into residence, and only to learn, or close to an apartment close to the university, only learn that their roommates from the pre-pandemic decided to stay home, and so they were alone in an apartment away from their family, in front of their computers hour after hour. And this has hit extroverts harder than I could have imagined, because I'm an introvert, and so they've lost their sense of connection. The social networks that sustained and energized them have disappeared. There are some attempts to recreate it virtually, but it's not the same. And so what I try to do to be a good mentor is first to be the mentor that I always wish I had. Someone who you can approach, who isn't judgmental, willing to listen, and has some shared experience. So, I often get students who not sure why they book the appointment. And I start out, by saying, I can remember when I was in law school and what it was like for me, and that connection allowed them to open up about, often take 10 minutes or so before they got to the real reason for their call. And so often it's been this sort of measure of anxiety that they can't pinpoint, and they're lacking the affirmation and the pats on the back they might get from profs or other students and stuff. And once they realize that it's a confidential conversation, you're there to help, you care enough to listen, you trust them enough to share some of your experiences, they typically walk away feeling a bit better. And some of the way I mark success in that role is whether they come back. So quite a few have. But like the treasurer said, each person is different, and they need help in different ways. One way that unmotivation or lack of motivation manifests itself is in procrastination. And so I had a student who called me and said she was paralyzed by anxiety because she had exams to write, and 7 days later an admin law paper that was due, and she hadn't started it, and she doesn't know how to start it and was afraid of starting it. And for her, I just said, well, why don't I review a draft? But for me to do that, you got to get it to me 4 days before your deadline. And so I created this sort of artificial deadline that she actually worked toward, and I reviewed her draft and she sent it in. So, in that case, it worked really well. I'm noticing, though, a lot with sole practitioners, mentoring them is more difficult for me because I don't have that experience. But I can tell from them that there's a lot of financial distress caused by the pandemic. One person told me their revenues year over year dropped by 95%. They also feel isolated and lonely, and so just having someone to talk to helps them. They're quite concerned about business development in a virtual environment. And then I noticed this even within my own department. Return to work is causing some considerable anxiety. We are in the middle of a survey right now. We're currently about half of the 600 plus people who work in my department have responded, and 78% want to have to continue to work from home with the option to come in when they need to. But the DOJ, 80% of lawyers there in the Department of Justice want to return to the office. So, it's going to be a struggle to know what the future of work looks like. But anyway, I'm happy to help talk through any of these things, because I find it's not important to have the answers as much as it is in a mentoring relationship to listen to the concerns, to understand them to the extent you can, to not judge, and to help people find the hope in their circumstances. Because I find when you put your heads together with your mentor and mentee, you can find your way out of a lot of tricky situations and what seem like hopeless circumstances. Back to you, Judah.
Thanks, Orlando. I mean, you're right. The mentoring relationship can help to navigate things before anxieties become even bigger, right? It's that safe space where you can learn and grow. And so we've got a couple more minutes on it. And Erin, why don't I move it to you? Because I know you've been a huge proponent of mentoring, and I know that I know you had a very special mentoring relationship at the start of your career, which had given you deep meaning. And so I want to make sure that you have a moment here as well.
Relatively brief, and I think my comment on mentoring feeds in nicely to with what Orlando ended with in terms of the future of work and mentoring going forward. A lot of my personal issues earlier in the year weren't necessarily pandemic related. I actually was one of those people who liked the increased work from home. I enjoyed saving an hour and a half every day on my commute. I was exercising more. I was eating better. I had lost about 30 pounds. And, I was sort of joking earlier in the pandemic that the pandemic was quite good for me in some respects. And I think where things fell off the rail for me, it was primarily work and workload related. And I think it's an issue that employers are going to see going forward in terms of how do we keep tabs on our people. And I think the main buzzword has been, check in with your people, see how they're doing. And there hasn't been a lot of discussion about how to do that and how to check in and what to do when people raise concerns. Anyone who's met me personally knows I'm not a shy human, and I'm not afraid to tell people what I think. And leading up to my my breakdown or my burnout, I had been communicating with different people within the firm, requesting different supports and requesting different workloads and trying to make things work better. And I wasn't getting much traction on those things. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about why that was. And it's not because I worked with terrible people. I worked with amazing people, great people, people I'm still friends with. But I think the disconnect was that I was at home, and if I was going through the same situation in the office, people would have seen me, crying at my desk frequently. People would have seen me, not looking myself, realizing there was times I wasn't showing up to work at time or leaving early for no reason because I was exhausted. And I think the check-ins shouldn't be superficial. How are you doing? It's been tough. And then people move on to whatever the work situation is. And, to realize when people are expressing issues, to really hash those out and try to work them out, and making the check-ins meaningful and intentional, and maybe sharing if you're having a difficult time, sharing that with your mentees as a way to get the discussion going. Because I do believe that my mentors and my supervisors and my managers would have handled everything much, much differently if we were all there in person. And this isn't a challenge that is going away. A lot of young lawyers in particular and students are quite comfortable working from home and quite like it. And we're going to have to adapt our mentorship to be far more intentional within the virtual work environment. And as I'm about to hire my first associate and a law student and a law clerk in the next few months and bring those people on board, it's certainly, top of mind for me to make sure we can keep those relationships close and intentional so that, I don't miss those signs from my people.
Yeah, those are really good points for where we're heading for next normal. And, even people in the office are sometimes able to mask how they're doing. And so it can be a challenge in all environments, but we're certainly going to have to figure out the work from home further and how we create supportive environments. So thank you, Erin. Doran, the last word on this topic is to you.
Thank you, Judah. The conversation about mentorship and the conversation about the National Wellbeing Study comes together for me because I'm on the steering committee for the Wellbeing Study, and we were putting it together. And the question, the issue of mentoring was one of the things I put into the study, which was a discussion about why some people leave the profession. And if for those of you who are taking the study, taking the survey, and I hope it's all of you, you may notice a question about, for those who left the profession, what were the reasons? And there was a long list, and it included absence of mentorship. And when I did the survey, that's one of the things I checked off. It's convenient. I can create a question and then I can answer the question. But that was a big deal for me, that for whatever ability or talent I had, it wasn't entirely being fleshed out because I didn't have a lot of sense of whether I was doing okay or not. And I didn't have the natural inclination to ask because I was too embarrassed. That's the human element of it, right? As much as we are attachment creatures who need support, who need to connect with other human beings, we also, with the legal professional mind, often isolate ourselves and self-judge about our vulnerability, and therefore we don't feel inclined to ask. We don't want to impose on people. We don't want people to know we're not on top of everything. We don't want them to know we're vulnerable, quite frankly, and so we hold it in. So the part I want to encourage people to do is, if you feel, especially earlier in your career, if you feel the inclination to hold back because, maybe I shouldn't ask, maybe I should just figure it out myself, you need the mentorship. It's one of the cornerstones of moving through a profession. The legal profession is built on professionalism, and professionalism includes bringing along the next generation. The previous generation deliberately bringing along the next generation with support and tutelage and understanding and guidance. Ask for it, you deserve it, you actually need it to be a good professional.
Thank you so much, Doran. We're going to, just being mindful of the time here, move on to sort of the next topic. And as Judah mentioned earlier, another area where people were seeking guidance around managing boundaries. So for this one, we'll kind of go through, go around the table or Zoom screen. And we're going to sort of ask everybody to give a perspective on boundaries and maybe share a quick tip. Again, keeping in mind, the timing. And Doran, I'm going to go back to you on this one. Start with you.
Thank you. The best example I ever heard, or the best characterization of boundaries I ever heard, was to think back to high school biology and the human cell with a nucleus and everything that's in the nucleus, and then there's a membrane around it called the semi-permeable membrane. And what does the semi-permeable membrane of the cell do? It allows in nutrients, and it allows in light and energy, and it expels waste products, and it blocks toxins. It's a gatekeeper. It controls what comes in and what goes out, what's healthy and what's not healthy. That's what we need. We need to have boundaries. We need to be able to say no to people, even if it's uncomfortable. In fact, the doctor from Vancouver, who's written so many amazing books, Gabor Mate, has a saying, I'm going to paraphrase, that if you have a choice between guilt and obligation, choose guilt. If you have something that someone's asking you to do and you don't want to do it, or you don't feel that you can do it, or you feel like it imposes on either your values or your time, you can feel the obligation to do it and then go ahead and do it and violate those values, and then maybe feel resentful towards the person for putting you in that position. Or you can just say, no, I can't, and then feel guilty that you let someone down. And we know we don't like to let people down. Choose the guilt. Let yourself feel like you at least honored what you needed. Set those boundaries with employers, with colleagues, with clients. Set them in terms of your physical space, what's workspace and what's home space. The idea being, we need structure around our lives. We need to know what is work and what is home. We need to know what is too much workload and just the right workload. We need to know what boundaries we need in terms of how people treat us and whether we'll allow them to treat us badly as well. We need to have boundaries with clients. I'm sure Jennifer will say something about this. I also was a family lawyer at some point, and that first meeting with clients, boy, we were setting some boundaries. We needed to set boundaries on all kinds of stuff because we have to teach people how to treat us. And that's a way of us protecting ourselves as well.
Thank you. I'm just going to go to the next person on my screen. Orlando, would you share a tip with us, please?
Thank you, Maywash. Just building on this theme of a semi-permeable membrane, I think it's asking too much to ask a person to create those boundaries themselves, especially in a competitive work environment. It has to be, at least in part, a top-down exercise. So I'm in management now, so to speak, with several hundred employees, and I try to create this boundary, or at least create the necessary ingredients for it, and in several different ways. One, for myself, I try to lead by example. I try to really define what's truly urgent. So many things are given to us as urgent that really aren't when you have to think about it. And I give assignments, I ask about their capacity to deal with it. I ask for early warnings if deadlines can't be met. I allow for mental health days without judgment. If there are longer leaves of absence required, I see them as opportunities to give other people acting responsibilities. I avoid contact after 6 p.m. and on weekends. I just recently, we went through a priority setting exercise and found we had an enormous amount of priorities that we could actually accomplish. But I said to people, the executive management team, that let's try, but not at the expense of our workforce. We'll do the best we can. I think the only way this works is if our employer and employees work together on boundaries with consequences. And that is to say that, if a law firm, big law firm or whatever, government, whatever it is, fails to do so, then they'll fail to retain and attract the talent they want. And unless there is that consequence, there's no downside, it would seem, to imposing urgent deadlines and ignoring the consequences for the well-being of your staff.
Those are great thoughts. Thank you so much. Treasurer, can I turn to you for the next tip?
So my tip is to consciously disconnect. Put down your phone, put down your tablet, put down your computer. You do not have to be available 24/7. It's a completely unrealistic expectation. We shouldn't put it on ourselves, and others shouldn't put it on us. We don't need to be available all the time. And picking up on what Orlando says is you can lead by example. So if you don't respond after 6 o'clock, or you're not responding on weekends, then you're not setting that expectation for your colleagues, opposing counsel, or for your clients that you're available all the time. I know it's easier to say than it is to do. You have to make a conscious attempt at it. That's what I've done in terms of evenings and weekends, mainly weekends for me. And I will also tell you that if you went to my husband or my daughter and you asked them how good I was at setting boundaries, they'd say I'm not very good. So I share that with you to say it's a struggle for me. I work at it all the time, but I'm working at this, not being available on weekends and after hours.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. Jennifer, can I turn to you for the next one?
Sure. This is a bit of a shout out to the family lawyers or legal professionals doing practice in a high stress area of law. I just want to say that your clients are probably going through some of the, really the most stressful time in their life, other than perhaps the passing of a loved one. So don't expect that they're all going to respect your boundaries. They're not. A third of them will not respect your boundaries, but you still have to be vigilant And also, Doran mentioned that the boundaries is permeable. Like it can expand and shrink a little, contract a little, depending on where you're at as a person. And if you need like a really strong, clear boundary because of whatever you're going through, then establish it. If you want to be a bit flexible in your boundaries and that works for you, then go for that. But be conscious of it. And with family law, there's always the risk of, vicarious trauma and maybe over-identifying with clients and bearing their emotional burdens. I've been doing family law for 19 years. I take a break every 3 months. Whatever, it might be a week, it might be a day, it might be an afternoon. I find a way to take care of myself and unplug from it so that I can then return and be motivated and helpful to other people. If I'm going through something myself that's really difficult, or if you're going through, the death of a loved one or someone in your family getting COVID or whatever it is, you need to take care of yourself and your family first. You're going to be of no use to your client. In fact, you're just going to resent them. So there you go. That's my piece on boundaries.
It's amazing thought from leaders. And finally, I'll turn to you, Erin.
So sorry I've disappeared. My FedEx did arrive and the dogs did freak out, but I think they're behaving now. So I'm terrible historically at setting boundaries. I do not excel in this area. And it's something that I've been really intentionally working on as I set up my own practice. At my old firm, it was very difficult for me personally to set boundaries because I was so driven to achieve the ultimate goal of big law, which was to become an equity partner, and the efforts that required. And, for me, I was really, really focused on working as many hours as I could, bringing in as many clients as I could, while also servicing the existing firm clients. And it is possible to do all those things in a healthy way, but I wasn't able to do that. Some of my partners at the firm were excellent at setting their boundaries and saying no and picking and choosing their work. And that just was not a skill that I had. If I had work coming to me that I thought would help me reach that next level, I would take it. So now that I'm out on my own, developing my own firm and bringing on my own people, I'm being far more intentional about the work that I want to do. I say right on my website that I'm not a volume practice. I don't take on every client. I have a few very good clients. Some of them are institutional that send me a decent amount of work. I take on the work I really like in the sports field. I do investigation work that I find interesting, and everything else I turn away. And sometimes I feel like a work broker because since I set up work and set up my own firm, I've been referring all of my friends' work rather than accepting work on my own. But, for me, it's been far easier to set boundaries when the only person I'm answering to is myself. I have my own very reasonable revenue expectations. I'm going to have to bring in enough work to feed the staff that I'm bringing on. But it's easier for me to set those boundaries now that the only person I'm answering to is myself than in a large firm. And I think you need to look at your own situation and your ability to set boundaries. And it might be you're in a situation where you feel you can't set those boundaries where you are, or you can work with people who have accomplished that successfully to work on that skill. But yeah, that's my speech about boundaries, and definitely still a work in progress.
Thank you so much. I read a quote somewhere. It's daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves, even when we risk disappointing others. And I work at this because I am a people pleaser and I don't like disappointing people. But I think you really have to think about your values and your priorities. And again, give yourself permission to set boundaries. Judah, over to you to wrap up.
It's certainly what I'm hearing a lot of is subtracting, and that's an option that's on the table. And I spoke about this at Solis and Smalls this year. And when we go out and talk about time management, we talk about subtracting because it's not an option that is intuitive, just in terms of how our brains work, but it actually can free up energy and space. And so as we try to create those boundaries, we need to have that agency, think about what we can decide is not going to make it onto our must-do list. And as lawyers, we're used to saying everything goes on our must-do list, but we have to practice that art of letting go. And with that in mind, we have to start to let go of this lovely conversation. And so please stay with us for a couple of minutes. Let me go through a couple of housekeeping matters. First off, thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers. While Aaron writes that speaking about mental health is not brave, it's necessary, I think it's both. And I want to thank all of our speakers for bravely sharing with us today. To our partner for presenting today, the Toronto Lawyers Association, and everyone on the team, Joan, Deirdre, Sandra, Stephanie, Darnell, and the entire group, thank you. Thanks to the Ontario Law Associations who promoted this event. We see you out there, and we thank you for the continued support. Over at LawPro, thanks to the entire CPSR team and everyone who's helped and cheered us from the sidelines as we engage in these new CPD programs. Thanks to everyone who shared your stories with us today. Just a reminder, today's program is eligible for 1.5 hours of Law Society professionalism for LawPro's risk management credit, and we've already put in the chat how you can claim that credit. But if you are watching this after the fact, go to lawpro.ca and click on the risk management credit icon and scroll down to today's event and claim it there. Our next event is on June 22nd. Again, it's working together remotely, managing and leading through COVID and beyond. I hope you'll join us for it. Finally, just one more thanks to all of you for taking the time today. We know how busy everyone is. We appreciate and value you. We thank you all. Please stay in touch, and thank you again. That concludes our program. Have a great day.